The summer sun had already scorched the high desert grass into gold when the rumbling began. At first I thought it was a distant storm, rare in these parts, but no clouds hung in the sky, only a dome of unrelenting blue. Then came the shriek of metal, followed by the deep, mechanical growl of an auger biting into the earth. I stepped out onto my porch, squinting across the field, and saw them. 3 trucks, 2 men in reflective vests, and one very self-important woman standing with a clipboard like she was directing a military op. The HOA had arrived. Again. You ever have one of those moments where everything slows down? Like the universe tilts just enough to whisper, something's not right. That was this moment. I watched them stake flags in my land like it was theirs, bright orange markers flapping against the breeze as if claiming territory. They weren't even subtle about it. No warning. No letter. No knock on the door. Just diesel fumes, high-vis arrogance, and a backhoe tearing into my fence line. I live on a stretch of property just outside town, a dry, stubborn patch of land that's been in my family for generations. My ranch is old but proud, the kind of place where the bones creak with stories and the wind seems to remember things. And while we technically fall under the jurisdiction of the Juniper Hills Homeowners Association, they've never had much to do with us. Until recently. That morning I stood barefoot in the dust, a coffee cup cooling in my hand, and watched them dig. The auger spun deeper into the soil, searching for water, so they claimed. I'd overheard one of the workers mutter something about a community irrigation solution. I knew what that meant. They wanted to tap groundwater on my side of the fence because theirs had run dry. And why? Because they'd overwatered their damn golf green for years while lecturing us about sustainability. Irony's a bitter drink at sunrise. I called out, "You got a permit for that?" But clipboard lady, her name was Lorraine though everyone just called her the enforcer, didn't even glance my way. She waved a hand like I was a barking dog behind glass. That's when I noticed the white PVC pipe on the side of the trench, marked Maine. And that's when I got that sinking feeling, the kind you get just before a bad car crash or a family secret unravels. They weren't just on my land. They were right above the main water line that supplied the entire HOA compound, including their precious clubhouse. What happened next came fast and loud. The auger hit metal. Sparks flew. There was a deep, vibrating clunk, then a silence so heavy it pressed on the ears. A second later, a geyser of muddy water exploded from the trench, shooting 10 feet into the air. One of the workers screamed. Lorraine's clipboard flew like a frisbee. The water surged, thick and brown, pouring down the slope like a flash flood. And wouldn't you know it? Gravity's a funny thing. That slope led directly into the clubhouse, the same one where they held their wine tastings, rule meetings, and passive-aggressive potlucks. I didn't laugh. Not yet. I stood there, stunned, as a wave of murky water swallowed the HOA's pride. Watching those smug smiles drown in their own disaster was like witnessing a painting fall off the wall, satisfying, surreal, and just a little sad. I didn't call anyone. I didn't have to. The fire department showed up 15 minutes later. So did half the neighborhood. Phones were out, cameras up. Lorraine screamed into hers, demanding backup, insurance, something, anything. But it was too late. The clubhouse was soaked, the lawn turned to soup, and their well project? Abandoned like a bad idea. I sipped my coffee. Still warm. And for the first time in weeks I smiled. If you'd asked me 5 years ago who the main characters in my life would be, I'd have said something like, my dog Brisket, the old ranch truck, maybe the stubborn mule that kicks the barn wall every morning. But life has a way of introducing you to villains you never asked for, and in my case that was the Juniper Hills HOA and, more specifically, Lorraine Markham. Lorraine wasn't elected to the board. She seized it in a coup that would have made Caesar blush. Before she moved here, she'd been a regional manager for some nationwide chain, office supplies or life insurance depending on who you ask. And she brought that same corporate tyranny to our quiet corner of the world. She wore crisp linen blouses even when it was 105 degrees, carried a leather folio like she was going to argue a Supreme Court case, and spoke in acronyms and fine print. But her favorite pastime wasn't golf, gardening, or even gossip. It was control. Then there was me, Jake Henderson. Third-generation rancher, semi-retired rodeo rider, and someone who doesn't take kindly to being told what color I can paint my barn. My family's land predates the Juniper Hills subdivision by about 70 years. When the developers came through in the 90s, they carved up the hills east of my fence line into a tidy little HOA-run neighborhood. I never asked to be part of it. But through some bureaucratic sleight of hand and one very sketchy annexation vote in 2001, my ranch technically became a buffer parcel inside their jurisdiction. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not against order. I keep my property clean. My fences are in good repair. I don't blast music or let cattle wander. But when they started sending me notices for unauthorized structures, aka my tool shed, and natural landscape inconsistencies, aka the damn cactus that's been there since 1948, it was clear Lorraine was using the HOA like a personal fiefdom. My nearest neighbors, Sam and Marcy, felt the heat too. Sam had a weather vane shaped like a rooster that the board claimed caused visual disruption. Marcy was fined for painting her door provocative red, whatever that means. We joked about starting a resistance group, complete with matching t-shirts and a slogan, "Live free or mow weekly." But beneath the laughter was a growing tension. We weren't just homeowners anymore. We were targets. The real kicker? Lorraine and the board rarely showed up unless there was an audience. Town halls, open houses, or inspection days, those were their battlegrounds. And the clubhouse? That was their throne room. An oversized structure with air conditioning strong enough to refrigerate meat, it was where Lorraine held court. HOA bylaws were interpreted like scripture, minutes were recorded with courtroom precision, and dissenters were met with icy smiles and escalating fines. The whole situation mattered to me not just because it was annoying, but because it was invasive. My ranch isn't just dirt and wood. It's my livelihood, my history, and my peace. I grew up mending those fences with my father, learning to read the sky for weather, and branding calves in the early spring. Every inch of that land has a story. And now a clipboard-wielding bureaucrat wanted to rewrite all of it. When I found out they were planning to expand water access by drilling into shared aquifers on my land, I was floored. That land wasn't theirs to touch, and they sure as hell didn't have a permit. But that's the thing about HOA boards run amok. They think rules are weapons, not boundaries. Lorraine once fined a man for aggressively parking. That's not a joke. It was in writing. So when I saw them roll in with their rigs that day, I knew this was more than a construction project. It was a test. They wanted to see how far they could go. Whether I'd push back. Whether I'd fight. And believe me, I would. Because this wasn't just about water. It was about land, rights, and respect. It was about standing your ground, literally. And as the events that unfolded would prove, sometimes standing your ground means letting people dig their own hole. Or in this case, their own flooded catastrophe. By the following Monday, my mailbox looked like it had been used for target practice, stuffed full of HOA envelopes, each more condescending than the last. Final notice. Cease and desist. Failure to cooperate. Their favorite tactic was to overwhelm you with paperwork, hoping you'd drown in a tide of bureaucratic jargon and just roll over. But I'd spent my whole life shoveling literal bull. I wasn't about to get tripped up by the metaphorical kind. The letters came daily. One accused me of obstructing community development by refusing access. Another threatened legal recourse for non-compliance with cooperative land use. The best one by far was a certified letter warning of a $500 a day fine until I voluntarily permitted access to the designated utility team. Voluntarily. As if someone had politely asked. When that didn't work, Lorraine turned up the heat. She scheduled an inspection of my property, complete with 3 board members and one very twitchy man in khakis holding a clipboard so tightly I thought he might snap it in half. They arrived without warning, marching up my driveway like they were executing a warrant. Brisket, my old Labrador, let out a low growl and parked himself between me and the front gate. Smart dog. Smarter than half the board, that's for damn sure. You're required to allow entry under section. You're trespassing under State Statute 76 to 101, I interrupted. You want to inspect something? Get a court order. Lorraine blinked. The clipboard guy blinked harder. Marcy, my neighbor, happened to be walking by and stopped to watch the exchange from across the road, her phone already raised to record. Lorraine smiled, tight and poisonous. You're making this difficult for everyone, Jake? No, I said. You did that when you brought a drill onto my land without permission. They left after 10 minutes and a lot of veiled threats about legal action. By that evening, I had another letter. This time a notice of violation citing several landscape irregularities, including excessive native growth. That's right. They tried to fine me for having too many weeds. On a ranch. In the desert. My anxiety was spiking. Sleep came in scraps. Every morning I'd find new survey flags staked a few inches closer to my fence line, like a slow-moving invasion. Lorraine had made it clear she wasn't going to stop, and she had a whole board of yes-men behind her. And as ridiculous as it all sounded, I knew the real danger wasn't just fines or threats, it was precedent. If I let them win this, what would stop them next time? A community pool on my hayfield? A dog park in my barn? I tried the legal route first. Hired a land use attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. He was a nice guy, honest, sharp, but even he looked uneasy after reading the documents. There's a lot of gray area, he said. You've got a strong case, but these things take time. Months. Maybe a year. Time I didn't have. The drill was scheduled to arrive in 2 weeks. I tried rallying the neighbors. Sam and Marcy were on my side, of course, and so were a few others who'd had their own run-ins with Lorraine's dictatorship. But most folks kept their heads down. They nodded in private, whispered support in the grocery store aisle, but refused to speak at meetings or write letters. Fear had done its job. The HOA had a reputation for retaliation, mysterious citations, sudden increases in dues, lost mail. People were scared. I started to feel like I was shouting into the wind. No matter how loud I protested, Lorraine and her board kept marching forward, papers in hand, rules rewritten as they went. Every letter felt like a taunt. Every flag stake was a slap in the face. And yet, despite everything, I held the line. Literally. I stood by my fence every morning with a cup of coffee and a camera, documenting their encroachment. I filed formal complaints with the county, the water board, even the state. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was resolute. But something needed to shift. Because they weren't stopping. And neither was I. That's when I realized I needed a new strategy, not just defense but offense. If they wanted to play dirty, they'd better be ready for a little mud of their own. It was around the third sleepless night, just past 2 a.m., when the idea came to me. Not like a bolt of lightning. More like a slow burn, the kind that starts in the back of your mind and spreads until your entire body feels it. I was sitting at my kitchen table, papers spread out like a war map, HOA bylaws, county water regulations, and a decades-old geological survey of the ranch that belonged to my grandfather. And that's when it hit me. They never checked the infrastructure. See, when my grandfather had the ranch's well system updated in the early 80s, he'd coordinated with the county to lay a main water line that not only fed our livestock troughs and house taps, but also ran underground, past our southern property line, under the hill, and down into a municipal tie-in near the original access road. It was deep, buried, and rarely used since we got our private system up and running. But it was still connected. And according to county maps, still registered. And the HOA? They were about to dig right into it. I sat up straighter, heart thudding. Lorraine's team had assumed the area they picked for their community well was just a dry zone of unused desert soil, perfect for tapping into groundwater. But they hadn't looked past surface-level topography. They missed the main utility map, the one showing the old water line snaking like a silent snake beneath their golden zone. If they drilled where they'd planned, they wouldn't be accessing an untouched aquifer. They'd be punching straight through a live, pressurized system, and releasing thousands of gallons of stored water in the process. I didn't have to stop them. I just had to let them keep going. But first I needed proof. So I drove out to the county records office the next morning. After an hour of digging through microfiche and half-disintegrated blueprints, I found it. Map R1287, filed under Henderson Ranch Utility Access, 1983. I made copies, highlighted the pipe's exact path, and double-checked it against the pink flags they'd staked on my land. They were lined up almost perfectly. A few feet off, sure, but close enough that if they drilled even a few inches too deep or in the wrong spot, they'd rupture the line. And judging by their equipment and clueless crew, I had zero faith they'd catch the mistake. Now, some people might have made a few calls at that point. Warned them. Filed an emergency stop work order. But I wasn't some people. I'd been fined for weeds. Fined for non-standard fencing. Threatened with legal action over a cactus. These people wanted to play hardball? I was done playing nice. Instead, I made a new plan. Step 1. I emailed the HOA board, Lorraine CC'd of course, asking for clarification about their drilling location, expressing growing concern over environmental impact. Polite. Vague. As expected, Lorraine responded with a 3-paragraph reply filled with confident language about sustainable goals, approved contractors, and no foreseeable disruption. She had no idea what was under her feet. Step 2. I told no one. Not Sam, not Marcy, not even the lawyer. I didn't need someone accidentally tipping their hand in a conversation or a group text. This was a one-man operation. Step 3. I bought a drone. A nice one with a camera sharp enough to read a license plate from 200 feet up. If they were going to break ground on my land, unauthorized and unrepentant, I was going to document every second of it. The countdown was on. I marked the calendar. Drilling day was listed on the HOA notice. July 3rd, the day before Independence Day. Fitting really? They probably thought it was symbolic. I thought it was poetic justice. And when the sun rose on July 3rd, I was ready. Coffee brewed. Camera charged. Drone primed. Map laid out on the table like a general before battle. I didn't need to sabotage anything. I didn't need to chain myself to a fence or stage a protest. All I had to do was wait. Let them drill. Let them fall into their own trap. Let the water, and the consequences, come pouring in. The morning of July 3rd was as hot as sin, the kind of heat that makes metal hiss and sweat bead before your second cup of coffee. I stood on my porch, drone controller in one hand, thermos in the other, and watched as the HOA's crew rolled up right on schedule. A flatbed truck hauling a rented drilling rig parked just inside my south fence line, where pink flags fluttered like fool's confetti. 4 guys hopped out, none of them older than 30, and started unloading gear with the cocky efficiency of people who think they know exactly what they're doing. I launched the drone and let it hover overhead, the camera rolling. From above, they looked like ants swarming a sugar pile. I could hear the hum of conversation from across the field, but no one bothered to walk up or knock. Why would they? Lorraine's last email had made it clear. All permits are in order. Access has been deemed compliant. In her mind, this was a victory lap. The drill started at 8:13 a.m. sharp. By 8:26, I heard the first pop. It was subtle, like the sound of a plastic bottle being twisted too hard. The crew paused. One guy scratched his head. Another checked the gauges. I zoomed the drone in closer, eyes fixed on the monitor. The lead driller adjusted something, then tried again. Pop hiss. What? The ground gave a shudder like something had been uncorked. A spout of muddy water burst up from the drill hole, shooting a good 10 feet into the air like a geyser at a theme park. At first it was just water. Then came the pressure. The old line, dormant for decades, had been holding back more than just runoff. Somewhere upstream the backup valve failed. Water surged. The crew panicked. One guy fell flat on his back trying to dodge the spray. Another yelled something unintelligible and ran to the rig's main shutoff, slipping in the rising mud. The truck tires started sinking into the field like a bad dream. I couldn't stop laughing. And then it got so much better. The flood followed gravity, downhill, past the rig, across the field, and straight into the HOA's pride and joy, the newly remodeled clubhouse. It sat at the bottom of the hill, barely 100 yards away, with pristine stucco walls and a $30,000 flagstone patio paid for with raised dues and special assessments. I watched from the drone feed as the water gained speed, channeling through the landscaping like a vengeful river. By 9:15 a.m. the clubhouse was flooded. Not just damp. Submerged. Water poured through the French doors and soaked the bamboo floors. It spilled over the bocce court and drowned the electrical boxes. The landscaping, 2 years of HOA beautification committee meetings, was reduced to floating mulch and drowned petunias. Lorraine arrived at 9:27, stilettos clicking, clipboard in hand. She didn't even make it out of her SUV. She sat there, mouth slack, staring at her empire being swallowed by a wave of her own making. My drone hovered overhead like the eye of God. She saw it. I made sure she did. By noon, the contractor had fled, the drilling rig was half sunk, and emergency water trucks were parked at the edge of the clubhouse lot. I uploaded the drone footage to a private drive, time-stamped and labeled. Then I emailed it, to my lawyer, to the county water board, and yes, to Lorraine herself. Subject: damage resulting from unauthorized drilling, evidence attached. The response came 48 hours later. An official letter from the HOA's legal firm, suddenly very apologetic in tone. They requested a meeting, to discuss potential mutual resolutions. Lorraine didn't sign it. She never contacted me directly again. Over the next few weeks, I watched from a distance as the HOA scrambled to contain the mess. The well project was abandoned. The clubhouse remained closed, indefinitely due to storm-related damage, though there hadn't been a storm in months. The budget ballooned with emergency repairs. Residents, finally fed up, started demanding answers. A special meeting was held. Board members resigned. Lorraine tried to cling on, said it was all a contractor error, but no one bought it. The irony? They still never fixed my gate. But that didn't matter anymore. I had won. Not just the battle over my land, but something bigger. I'd exposed their arrogance, their incompetence, and their blind belief that power always wins. Sometimes the land itself has the last word. And when it does, it speaks loud and it floods. By the time the leaves started to turn in late September, the clubhouse still smelled like mildew and regret. The front doors remained locked, the windows fogged with condensation, and the once manicured flower beds out front had grown wild. People whispered about lawsuits and insurance denials, about misappropriated funds and board mismanagement. Lorraine resigned quietly that month, citing personal stress and community pressure. No one threw her a farewell party. At the next HOA meeting, held awkwardly under a tent in the community park, there were more residents in attendance than I'd ever seen. People who used to avoid these things like the plague suddenly showed up with clipboards and questions. Sam stood up and read a motion to revise the board's emergency authority clause. Marcy seconded it. Someone even brought cookies. Democracy, it turned out, was alive and well. It had just needed a little water to wake up. As for me, I got a formal apology. Well, sort of. A letter signed by the interim board chair, acknowledging the HOA's failure to properly communicate drilling activities and secure all appropriate access rights. No direct mention of the flood, of course. But it came with a waiver of all past fines, a written agreement stating they'd never attempt to claim access through my ranch again, and a promise that future development would remain well within the community's actual property line. I framed it, hung it in the barn next to a photo of my grandfather standing beside the original well he dug in 1982, boots in the dirt, sleeves rolled up, a quiet smirk on his face. I like to think he'd have appreciated the poetic justice. In the weeks after, something unexpected happened. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves started waving when they passed by. Sam helped me replace some fencing on the north line. Marcy brought over a blueberry pie and said, "I'm glad you didn't back down." Even the grumpy guy from Lot 7, who once filed a complaint because my rooster crowed too early, offered to help patch a leaking irrigation line near the road. We weren't best friends, not by a long shot, but the air had shifted. The fear was gone. Or maybe it had just changed sides. I learned something out of all of this. Something that sounds simple but took a whole flood to understand. Boundaries matter. Not just physical ones like fences and property lines, but personal ones. The right to say no without being harassed. The right to protect what's yours, even when the people pushing against you claim to have the greater good on their side. Too often we're told to compromise for the sake of peace. But peace built on bullying isn't peace. It's submission dressed in polite words and stamped envelopes. And the truth is, if someone's willing to walk all over you once, they'll do it again. Unless you dig in your boots, stand tall, and make sure they know where the line is. And what happens if they ignore that line? Well, sometimes the ground fights back. Now, when I walk the southern edge of the ranch, where the pink flags once flapped and the drill rig sank, I notice how green it's gotten. The flood left behind a strange gift: new growth. Wild grass. A few blooming desert sunflowers. It's almost beautiful in its own unruly way, like nature reclaiming a mistake. The drone sits on a shelf now, collecting dust. I haven't had to use it since. I keep it charged though, just in case. Because if there's one thing I've learned from this whole ordeal, it's this. You don't mess with a man's land, especially when the land knows how to mess back.